So, good afternoon, or good evening, or good morning, depending on what part of the world you're in. I'm happy you could join us today for this webinar on the foundations of learning, assurance of learning. I'm joined with my colleague Desiree Moore, who's in Colorado. I'm visiting you, or today here in Paris, France, with our European office. My name is Paul Millette. I am the director of EMEA, which means the European, Middle East, and African operations for Peregrine. So I work with clients and our partners on this side of the globe. I also have lots of activities with US clients as well as our friends in Wyoming and other parts of the states. So I'm looking forward to sharing with you some information and ideas on the foundations of assurance of learning, and look forward to hearing from you. We'll have some opportunity at the end of the presentation to hear a little bit if you have some questions. I'll ask Desiree to go ahead and introduce herself. Desiree?
Hello, everyone. It's so nice to have you here today. I'm Desiree Moore. I'm our Director of Marketing and Strategic Growth here at Peregrine Global Services. I live here in Craig, Colorado, very rural, but I'm moving to Wyoming where our home office is in just a couple months. We're getting ready to list the house. So I'll be with the team. I come from higher education, about 8 years of experience in education, and quality in education is a passion of mine and Paul's, and we're excited to share with you today.
Great, thanks Desiree. And just to add that, yes, as you can see with my gray hair, I have a few more years of experience, probably counting up to almost 40 now. But as Desiree mentioned, you know, our passion and mine has been in my career. I've been in higher education starting in Massachusetts at Clark University's Graduate School of Management at their business school, and then worked at a number of different institutions, moved to Europe and worked with the European Federation of Schools. And for those of you who are familiar with IACBE, worked with IACBE, and the last few years with Peregrine. And so delighted to share some of my experience, and Desiree brings a lot of administrative as well as faculty experience. So we both have that side. We kind of have that 360-degree view of academia. So hopefully we'll be able to share some of that with you as well. To get started here, we really like to have some participation on your part, although that's limited with a lot of participants today. We can't really open up the microphones as though I usually like to, but unfortunately with a number of people, and we're delighted to have as many joining us today. But we will have a number of poll questions, so please take a minute, and when we bring those poll questions up to respond, it helps us understand a little bit more about our audience and get you a little bit more engaged. As well, there is a question pane you'll notice on the menu that you have, the opportunity to ask questions. So please do, as we're going through our presentation today, please do feel free to ask questions and also comments. I always learn, even though I've been doing this for a long time, I always learn, and I'm delighted to hear what other people have to say about what I'm presenting, what we're presenting. So please feel free to just slip in a comment, but yes, please do ask questions. We do have time where we're going to be entertaining those questions. If we don't get to them all, we'll certainly respond to you individually with answers to your questions. We also have, of course, contact information at the end, so feel free to reach out to us. For me, anyone on the team, including myself as well as Desiree. So as we get started here, I always like to begin with a bit of inspiration. So we'll start with one of my favorite quotes, and it has been a favorite of mine for a long time, because I believe that Nelson Mandela, understood that to change the world in a positive way, we can really achieve that through education. Because really, without critical thinking, without education, which helps us to think critically, which really is one of the major goals of being educated, no matter what field we're in, is to become more critical thinkers. Without that, we fall into ignorance. We fall into the believing things that aren't true and not being able to wade through. Today, as we know, there's a lot of information, and the better we are equipped to be critical thinkers, the better we are to wade through some of the information that we get on a daily basis that we're bombarded with. So, it really is a powerful weapon to change the world and to become more positive in the world. And as educators, I believe that we really do play a crucial role in improving the world. I know that sounds very like a very big task to achieve, but I do believe that we are improving the world that we live in. And of course, as teachers, we see that on the front line. Those of us who've been in teaching, we recognize over the year, and also if we are with our students throughout their education, we see those changes, and we get it really is one of the most motivating parts of teaching. But it's not just teachers. It really is all of us involved in other roles. If we're in a college or a university and involved in quality assurance, or involved in academics, in other aspects of programs, we too have a role, because we're doing our jobs to really improve the quality. And then through our actions and through what we're doing, some of that administrative stuff is really to improve that educational experience for learners. And this does lead to positive change. So, for me, it's a much more holistic approach in terms of what we're doing at institutions to improve the lives of learners. And I think this quote really helps encapsulates that for me, that what we're doing really is an opportunity to change the world. Now, as we move through this, I want to try to guide our discussion today. And I like to do this by looking at the notion of how we can use learning outcomes as a tool to improve quality. And learning outcomes are those things that we see across different accreditors in different educational academic programs, from primary, secondary, and tertiary education. Quality assurance through learning outcomes has become, in the last 20 years, a very important force to helping improve quality. So I use the notion of quality through learning outcomes as a guide, as a guide of the process. Now, understanding why they're important, I think, is important to consider. Not only are learning outcomes, and I'll stop here, learning outcomes, there are many ways of using this term. They're also used as assurance of learning, or learning goals, or learning objectives, or student learning outcomes. I use them just one term in a very general way as learning outcomes. So they fit into a number of different categories, but that's what I'll be referring to them as today. So for learning outcomes, the purpose of learning outcomes is really important, as we know, for accreditors, because they help us to measure what we expect students to be able to know and what we expect them to be able to do once they've completed their studies. They also really help ensure that there is a process of continuous improvement in place. It's not just a once in a while event that takes place to satisfy some type of accreditation standard. It's really designed as a process by which we're looking at continuous improvement. And for all our stakeholders, including students and partners and businesses, it's strategic that the school remains transparent and accountable. And learning outcomes really do help provide that transparency and accountability that we often look for in a quality assurance process. Finally, learning outcomes, if done well, really enable a school to what we call to close the loop. Now, I generally don't like to use too many idiomatic phrases. As a person living in a foreign country, I know that they can be stumbling blocks, but this one constantly comes up when talking about accreditation and talking about learning outcomes. Simply put, it really means just after a process of evaluation and analysis, changes are made to an academic program to really help improve any areas that are not meeting your stated learning outcomes. So you're trying to mitigate those weaknesses that you find after measuring and evaluating what your expectations are. And if you see weaknesses, then you go back and you make those changes. From there, the process begins again, and you're able to determine that if you've made changes, were there any differences as a result? Hence, you're traveling through a process from beginning to end and then continuing with it. So there's this notion of closing the loop, which means you make those decisions and then begin again to see if those changes. So this is a process, and I'll bring up a cycle that we'll take a look at in a minute. But these have become very important in the educational process. Now, with regard to accreditation, I think it's clear that with accreditation, it has become a significant focus among all accreditors. And you see the list here, which includes large international accreditors like ACSB, IACBE, ACBSP, but also discipline-based accreditors, as well as regional accreditors. In the United States, you have regional accreditors, as well as here in Europe and in Asia and in the Middle East. There are a lot of accreditation bodies that have integrated learning outcomes and goals as part of their process of evaluation for accreditation. So there's a lot of pressure on institutions to put into place a solid accreditation, outcomes assessment process integrating learning outcomes. So there's a fundamental requirement on the part of many of these accreditors. If I can't imagine one now that doesn't. I know here in Europe, and as I mentioned in the Middle East and Asia, that's very much part, and I know in the States. So there is really accreditation focus around looking at this process of assessing, evaluating, and closing the loop, as I said. Now, I'm going to get to a poll. I see if I can ask Desiree to open this first poll, because I'd like to get this started. If you can't, Desiree, just let me know and I'll do it on my side.
It's launched.
Okay, great. So here, this question is, do your academic programs have learning outcomes for, and I've broken them down in a couple of areas, for your core or fundamental subjects, which means if you're looking at business, your marketing, accounting, finance, those discipline-based, that technical skill subject area that many accreditors require. Can be any type of academic program that has core fundamentals. Workplace competencies, this is the second area. Do you have learning outcomes for those, which are often soft skills, leadership, creativity, teamwork, negotiation skills? This is a classification. We sometimes call them transferable skills. Do you have them for both? And if you have not yet established a formal process, please let us know. That doesn't often happen. Sometimes we don't have a formal process in place, but most institutions will have something in place. And I can see, I'm looking at those numbers coming in. We're almost up to over 60, so I'm going to give a little bit more time for us to take a look at those numbers. So just click on whether you have the core fundamental subjects covered in your learning outcomes, if you have workplace soft skills covered, both, and if you haven't started the process. So I'll give you a couple more seconds before I close the poll so that we can see what our audience has chosen as their numbers. So I think we're pretty good.
All right, I'll go ahead and close it and then share it out.
Yeah.
All right, and you should be able to see the poll results now.
So if you can't see them, I can read them off to you. With regard to core fundamental subjects, we've got over 30% of the people who've checked have those covered. Workplace soft skills or competencies, if you will, a little under 10%, and 62, which a large percentage, have both. And interesting, I think this is the first time I've seen a poll, and I've done this one a few times, where everybody has something. they're covering, which is really good news. That means that we have an audience who pays attention to this. Now, what's interesting is that you're covering more your core, but not as many as your soft skills, which is typical. This is a challenging area to come up with learning outcomes for these areas, even though we're seeing more and more requirements on the part of organizations for us to integrate this into our learning outcomes, as well as businesses requiring students to have those soft skills competencies. I really don't like that word, but it's one that I can't find a better word at the moment. So this is, I think you can close that, the results, we don't need to have that. So we're seeing here what is often typical core and fundamental subjects more often than the soft skills, but we've got a lot of people covering both, which is great. So that lets me know that the audience is well aware that these are things that we need to take a look at. And what I'll do is I'll introduce a little bit of this process of developing them and looking at how to put them into place. And then Desiree and I will look at some solutions to help maybe come up with ways of assessing those both hard skills, the discipline-based technical skills, as well as soft skills. So we're going to take a look at that in sort of our second part to explore some of the solutions that you can think about with regard to assessing those both hard and soft skills. So the question remains how do we meet these requirements that the accreditors have for us? How do we measure retained learning? How do we continuously improve, and how do we provide transparency, accountability, and close the loop? So this is one of the questions. We want to bridge that gap between this requirement that we're often confronted with and how we meet these needs. Now, many of you obviously are doing this, so that's a good thing. I'm going to explain a way that I work with institutions, and that we often at Peregrine work with institutions to help them not only develop this if they haven't, take a look at their current process, but also maybe think about a different way of looking at this process to help reinforce what you might already have in place. Now, to begin with, there are a lot of different approaches to a process, and I like to revert back to the tried and true, and that's our friend Edwards Deming, who I'm sure everybody in the room is familiar with the PDCA, which is a great place to start for me, because it really does help us take a very systematic and easy to put into place view of closing the loop. And this has been used by industry and businesses for many years. Now, what I have here is a process that's been adapted for higher education institutions and looking at learning outcomes. We start with the plan, which is your objectives and looking at your learning outcomes, collecting the data, which is the do process, analyzing your data, sharing the results is the study part of the Deming cycle, as well as the act, which is the closing the loop part of making changes. So I often use this as a starting point to look at the process of continuous improvement for student learning. Now, I'd like to cover a little bit here on the difference between formative and summative. Some people are unclear. This just means course versus program level. Course level is very important. Each faculty person or instructor wants to integrate this into each of their courses and modules to evaluate student learning at the course level. It helps motivate students. It contributes to improving teaching as well. It's an integral part, and it's done at the course level. Where program or summative level usually happens at the end. It's used for accountability of the program level and used to improve program level. It can be done in a pre and post format to demonstrate added value, and it really is designed to measure integrated or retained knowledge. We want to make sure that our students are graduating with good retained skills before they start their careers. I give the example often of if I'm having surgery and I'm about to go under and I see the surgeon with a scalpel and he's flipping through a book, how do I use this scalpel? I'm going to jump off that table. In the same way, we want to make sure that our students are well equipped before they work, they're employed, so that they are able to jump in and be operational. They're not going to know every single detail, but operational on the fundamentals of what they need to be able to do in the environment. Lots of training as well, but we want to make sure that there's a retained knowledge. There are two ways to look at this retained knowledge: through direct measure of student learning. Many of you know that there are two, direct and indirect. Many accreditors require you to have both direct and indirect. So we want to measure retained learning with direct measures. So you actually sit students down and get them to answer some questions, get them to do something and measure their knowledge. They can be done with an outcome that has sort of an expectation, a result that you want from that retained knowledge. They are generally done as a standalone, but sometimes are embedded into a course or a module. Direct measurements are used also to support the improvement of the institution, sometimes integrated into the KPIs, key performance indicators at the institution. So direct is directly measuring what students know. Indirect meaning sort of a third person or a third party. So you're asking the students to give their perceptions, their feelings. You can ask employers to give a report on their interns, what they think their knowledge is. You can use alumni evaluation. You can use this to substantiate student learning. It includes surveys and interviews and course evaluations. It also can mean looking at your retention at the institution, how many students are transferring out, how many students are finishing their programs, and graduation rates and placement rates. Those can be used to evaluate student learning. And also, these are often done in conjunction with direct measures of student learning. Now, one of the things that comes up often is why can't I use final grades? And many of you who are doing this understand, but those of you who are new to the process, example here, marketing class, 4 ways to evaluate a student. I have student 1 and student 2. They both have the same final grades, but as you can see, these different ways of assessing them are quite different. If I'm using the final grade, I'm including participation, which isn't learning. It's an important part of the learning process, but I'm not measuring learning. I have a presentation that's a group presentation, so I'm not measuring individual. There's a paper, but everybody has a different subject. The only thing they're getting that's the same is an exam. And as you can see here, even the exam has to have certain questions that are part of the learning objectives or learning outcomes, and not all the entire exam. So at the end of the day, you'll notice that it's important that we don't use grades or marks that are final grades or cumulative grades, grade point averages to assess learning outcomes, because we're not really measuring overall learning in the academic program, and these are going to skew that in a way that's not going to be accurate. So keep in mind that we don't use grades because they really don't represent a global view. They represent a one class view, and even then, not just on student learning. So there's a lot more I can discuss on that, but I want to move ahead. When we're looking at learning outcomes, we have to be sure that they're objective, comprehensive, and measurable. So we know that it's important that we take the objectivity out of it, because we don't want to be swayed by a personality or a bias. It needs to be comprehensive because we want to measure a number of different things that we're expecting students to know. But a challenge is also making sure that the results are measurable, that we have something at the end of the day that's quantifiable. Now, when we're developing learning outcomes, I revert to Bloom, Benjamin Bloom, who developed the Taxonomy of Learning. And as you can see here, the level of looking at the order of skills goes from lower order to higher order. And it's important to keep in mind that as we move up in academic programs, we move up in this order of skills. It's very important to keep in mind that we want to move away from using generalizations like understanding and applying, and move to the right-hand side where the verbs are going to be able to be measurable. So it's really important as we go through. When we work with institutions, I work with them very closely at helping them develop these learning outcomes if they haven't already, or redesigning them so that they can be something that can be measured. Because on the right-hand side, we can measure those, where understanding marketing can't be measured, but I can measure if someone knows how to summarize, or if someone knows how to infer, or someone knows how to interpret. I can measure those kinds of things. I can't measure understanding, so you have to drill down a little bit, and it's a challenging thing to come up with these, but it's important. Now I have an example here that's by degree level, because as I showed you, there's upper level, upper order and lower order learning outcomes, and I have broken them down into, I have 8 areas that I'm covering. You'll notice that there are some soft skill areas like critical thinking, teamwork, communications, but my core business areas, which all accreditors expect you to evaluate. These are the core competencies of marketing, finance, accounting, and business, or in other disciplines. I have it for my master's degree. I also have it for a doctorate degree. And if you read these, I'm not going to read through them all, but you'll notice that the language I'm using in each one reflects a different level of expectation. And that reflects the Bloom's taxonomy. So when working to develop learning outcomes, it's important to keep in mind that you're measuring different levels of knowledge as you go from bachelor's through doctoral level, as well as the different types of learning you're expecting to take place in a program. Now, I have an example here of an MBA program that I've selected just 6 different types of areas I want to evaluate. I have developed my learning outcomes related to those areas. You'll notice I have 5 areas related to my soft skills, and then I have the 10 disciplines, asterisk there, accounting, marketing, finance, and I'm able to measure those with a comprehensive exam. You'll notice this is my objective. I have a percentage of graduates who will receive a certain score. I have different tools that I'm using, a 360 evaluation of critical thinking, of teamwork, of communications. That's a 1 tool that measures those things. I also have an end of program comprehensive assessment that measures the 10 core business subjects. So I'm using and even mixing it with leadership. So we'll make this available to you, but I don't want to spend too much time reading through a lot of these words, but I just wanted to show you that there is a way of developing objectives based on the tools that you put in place. Now, when we look at learning outcomes, I like to have a little plan, and I've borrowed this loosely from ACBE, which, as I mentioned, I worked previously with. So, but ACBSB, AMBA, ACSB, Equus use these same types of tools when helping you put together. This is a plan, and here I've listed for a BBA program 5 learning outcomes. I have my direct measures, I have my indirect measures, and my performance targets. This gives me a very quick, now there's obviously results and what you're going to do with those results that are part of it, but I don't have 2-hour presentation, I have an hour presentation. So today we're just going to focus on taking a look at an example of a plan that you can come up with. So I have them linked to my learning outcomes. I have my program comprehensive assessment, an internship, and a senior executive survey that I'm going to be using. Now I'm going to bring up another poll. So I'm going to ask Desiree if she'll bring up my next poll.
Absolutely.
And this poll is, yep.
I went ahead and I added the PDF of the slides to the handouts.
Perfect.
And GoToWebinar. So if any of you are on here and you want to see and really dig into all of those learning outcomes that Paul was walking you through, then you can download that very simply. But we'll also follow up with an email in which you can request them. So
perfect. Thanks for doing that, Desiree. So we're going to open this poll, and this one is: do you have performance targets for your learning outcomes? And now we're moving ahead a little bit, and the performance targets, my question is, yes, we have all learning outcomes have performance targets, which is a certain percentage of students will get a certain percentage of something, score, but not a grade. Remember, we're not using grades, a certain percentage of a score or some type of tool that's measuring. Most have performance targets. And the last one is: we have not yet established a formal process for measuring learning outcomes. And I know the poll comes up a little different. I wasn't able to use all of the different words, so it might be slightly different on what you're looking at. But here you have the opportunity to check one of those with some performance targets. And it's great people are voting. Keep those votes coming in. Excited to see people are doing much better now, so they're paying attention. So that's good. Thank you, and looking forward to everyone continuing to vote. We're doing pretty well there, Desiree.
We are.
Yeah.
We'll just give it a second more and then I'll go ahead and launch. I still see some votes coming in. So most of you have voted, but I know there's a couple who have not. So I'll just give you a second. All right. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results.
Great. So if you can see the results, really good news. And this is one of the better groups that we've had. I have almost 65% have really established these performance targets, which are hard to do. And it is important. Now, moving those performance targets is an important thing that we should keep in mind. I'll bring that up in a minute. We have almost 35% of people who have most of them, which is normal, and some are still trying to establish a process by which they're doing this. And this is a challenging part of the process, coming up with something, because you're looking at your learning outcomes. Some of them lend themselves to quantifiable numbers that you can look and calculate, where others are much harder to do. So rubrics have to be designed in a way that can capture that. And if you want to meet with myself or anyone else at Peregrine outside of the solutions that we provide, but to have a little more fluid discussion about this, I'm happy to meet. I'm passionate about this area. I'm happy to meet and talk with you if you are interested in learning a little bit more. Be happy to sit down. That's part of the Peregrine experience, is to work with schools to help them walk through some of this process. So if you're stuck in that area and want some assistance, as you can see, I have a little bit of experience and can help it's sort of adapted to your current situation. But it is interesting that we see people are really working on performance targets. One thing to remember, at institutions, at accreditors, and this is all accreditors, regional, national, and international. If you have your learning outcomes and you claim that you have met 100% of all your learning outcomes for all your students, that is going to raise a big red flag to all the accreditors that you're not doing your job very well. I'm sorry to say that meeting all your learning outcomes means that you're not digging deep enough into the data and information to finding out where areas of weakness can be improved, because no one is ever 100% quality. There's always areas to improve. And if your learning outcomes are measuring something that everybody is reaching, then you need to change your learning outcome, or you need to change your measurement or your tool to dig deep enough to find, well, if they're doing well, or you make your benchmark higher, you push it up. And please keep in mind, because I worked on the other side of the fence where I went and audited schools for accreditation, and a lot of schools saw that reaffirmation and accreditation, if they didn't meet all their learning outcomes, that was going to put that at risk. In fact, that's the opposite. Creditors want to see that you're paying attention to this, and that if you're not reaching what you're expecting to reach, what are you going to do and how are you going to do that? And if you're reaching them, great, celebrate it and move on to something else that allows you to look at other areas that you can look for improvement, because really that's the continuous improvement process. It's not just settling in and saying, well, we're doing great, we don't have to do anything. No, the process is continual improvement. So just to keep in mind, learning outcomes are going to move, as well as those targets. Now, as part of our process today, Peregrine offers, for those people who are attending, this wonderful module on an introduction to assurance of learning. And this is, even for the well-seasoned accreditation, a quality assurance person, a really nice module that is quite sophisticated in covering all of the different accreditors, their expectations, and how the learning assurance of learning process can be developed and improved. And this is usually a fee-based module, but for today's participants, if you're interested in this module, it's a great module, as I said, for both seasoned and especially people who are new to accreditation, but also it covers a lot of different areas with examples and with a little bit of homework as well. So at the end of the presentation, we'll be putting up a poll, and if you're interested to receive this no-cost assessment, no-cost learning module on learning outcomes and assurance of learning, please click that at the end. But this is a really nice module that we spend a lot of time with the different accreditors to put this together to help institutions. And when we do webinars like this one, we do want to make it available to those of you who are participating as a thank you for joining our webinar. Now, I'm going to spend a few minutes, and Desiree and I are going to spend a few minutes to cover some of the resources that are available and solutions that Peregrine has available for assessment solutions. And some of you are familiar with Peregrine. Those of you who are not familiar, we are an education technology company that provides educational assessments and educational solutions for a broad range of activities within a higher education institution. Today, we're focusing really just on assessment, but I invite you to look at our website. You will see a lot of other opportunity, but again, this is a 1-hour webinar. We're not going to cover everything, but today I'm going to look at some of the solutions that we have developed to help you with putting into place an assessment process for measuring objectively and comprehensively learning outcomes, as well as student learning in general. Now, Peregrine offers a number of these different assessment tools in many different areas: early childhood, public administration, general education, accounting, finance, healthcare, business, criminal justice. We have one dedicated to non-US institutions called Global Business Education. That's in the business area. And this one's designed to be non-US centric. I work with many schools in the Middle East, Asia, and Africa with this particular service, as well as workplace soft skills. Now, I'm not going to cover all of these because, again, we don't have that time, but we've selected two, which is generally our audience is most interested in business administration assessment and workplace soft skills assessment. So we're going to split this up. Desiree's going to speak a little bit about eValue skills, and I'll speak a little bit about the business administration. But just to keep in mind, all of these assessment tools run similarly. Workplace soft skills are slightly different, but the ones at the top in the 8 different categories run the same way, even though I'm going to be talking about business assessment. The criminal justice, early childhood education, or healthcare management also function very similarly in how it's put together and what is provided to you and to your students. So let's take a look at business administration. And again, it applies to virtually all of those assessment tools that are program-based assessments. And this is an academic programmatic assessment that's going to, as I said, look at the entire academic program. You have the opportunity as an institution to select topics in business administration. As I said, for all of ours, we have topics, and you can choose those topics related to what you're teaching at the core business level. You'll notice that in business, we have these areas. Most institutions will select up to 12 different areas, and this will end up being one comprehensive test in which students will be taking an exam online that will include questions from the areas of the topics that you choose. So your students will not be taking just one, but it'll be a combination, and usually reflecting your core business areas. That's why we talked about that. Now, what's important here is if you, at the end of the day, and the results show your students are doing pretty well in most of the areas, but in strategy, their scores aren't the 70% that you want, they're below that. Well, strategy is a big area, so it's important to have data that you can dig deep enough. And with Peregrine, we offer the opportunity for you to dig really deep into the data to the point where we each of those topic areas will have a subject area, 4 to 8 subject areas. And you might find that really the students are fine, except in their SWOT analysis, joint ventures, and life cycle, industry life cycle knowledge. So that allows you to focus really much more on that rather than trying to redo the entire strategy area that you're teaching, really to focus on making some changes to that particular area. So what's really nice about the opportunity to look at these topics, but each to dig deeper when you're wanting to look at whether or not you should be making changes. So each of the topics comes with these subject areas, and when you're looking at that, it's pretty important to look at that. We have a lot of additional topics that allow you to look at more specialized concentrations, marketing, human resource, even homeland security, healthcare management, accounting and finance, although we do have a separate entire test banks on criminal justice. These are additional talks, or you can add topics that you create. In Europe, I have a lot of schools that want topics on luxury, so I work with them to create a 14, which is luxury management, and I work with schools in Geneva that are in the banking industry, and they want banking on the European level, or they want banking in following Islamic law. So there are very specific test banks that they want to develop, and I work with schools in developing those test banks that can be integrated into these topics that are part of that comprehensive exam. So why is this interesting for schools? You can align them with your learning outcomes from those those topics. It can be integrated directly into your LMS system. For undergraduate and postgraduate, we have a large client administration site which allows you to look at the reports. I'll go really quickly through the reports because I'm starting to eat into our question time. We allow you to benchmark your scores with institutions that are similar to yours. We call them aggregate pools, as well as managing to compare your students to each other, to different cohorts, one year to the next, one major to the next, one location to the next, which is very interesting to be able to evaluate the quality of different locations or different majors. We have had, I think a few years ago, hit 1 million assessments. So we have a lot of experience in the security. So students take a secure test online. It can be proctored or non-proctored or invigilated, as we say here. So that's a choice the school can use. And we address, of course, those accreditation requirements, this benchmarking, longitudinal review. We have a lot of reports, internal analysis, which looks, as I mentioned, at the topic and subject level. We have an external comparison report. As I mentioned, we have up to 5 different groups that you can choose to compare yourself to, other accreditations, US, non-US. You can look at the different types of pools that you want to compare yourself. If you're a faith-based institution or a law of public institution, there's the opportunity to compare yourself to those, which some accreditors want you to do. Longitudinal report is wonderful, allowing you to look over time, provide your regression analysis to see how your students are doing over time, which is a very important. So you can do a pre and post test, which is often, or over time. Each student receives a wonderful certificate of completion. You don't have to let them do this, but a lot of students really like that. Here in Europe, they include it as part of what we call a diploma supplement, which is an extensive, what you would call an extensive sort of transcript, which lists all the courses, all of the work they've done. They add a portfolio of their activities. And students really like this completion certificate because it gives them an opportunity to see where they are. So I've taken up a lot of time. Sorry, Desiree, and that always happens. I'm a talker. So I'm going to let you have some time to talk about evaluate skills. So I'll switch over the controller to you so you can now take control of the PowerPoint, and I'll give you your opportunity to move this ahead.
Perfect. Can you see my screen all right?
I think yes, perfect.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you, Paul. That was great. I always enjoy your enthusiasm for learning outcomes, and the business administration assessment is a very powerful tool for assessing student learning, and I think you covered it very well. Again, we are available to meet with you for a one-on-one consultation to talk about your learning outcomes, maybe your assessment processes that you have right now, and kind of provide that thought leadership to you, even if you want to talk about it and see if maybe you're having some challenges that we could provide a solution to or give you some ideas to overcome. But I want to talk about evaluate skills. Evaluate skills is a 360-degree evaluation process, and we've developed it. It's long been used in leadership, but we developed it to be used in higher education, and I'll discuss that just a little bit more. You likely have learning objectives centered on the types of knowledge a graduate will have upon program completion. I mean, you said you did in the poll, and it's likely that you have more idealistic learning objectives focused on the conduct and principles of graduates as they go into the world. Here in this list, we see that 5 of the 6 learning outcomes reflect behavior, such as being a leader, respecting diversity, and working effectively in teams. And so you will see that the blue is analyze complex data and understanding financial implications of managerial decision making. That is more of a technical hard skill, but the rest are much softer in nature. But it's difficult to evaluate these soft skills. Over the last 10 years, countless studies, research reports, and media outlets have said there's a significant skills gap found in our workforce. And workplace skills, we also call them soft skills or professional skills, are the personal qualities necessary for situational awareness and workplace effectiveness. These skills include adaptability, communication, and critical thinking. Over the years, employers and higher education institutions have found difficulty in defining, evaluating, and developing these skills. Yet in higher education, we've also struggled to assess them. It's interesting, we call them soft skills because they are the hardest to teach and the hardest to assess. Soft skills are hard to assess because it's hard to define them due to lack of standardization. The term soft skills is misleading. Just as I said, they're the hardest to teach and assess. And then also they have some subjectivity or bias, right? So if I said, what do you think of Paul's communication? I would say, well, he's really good at it. Did you hear all the, did you just hear him, right? But that's not a very, I really like Paul. We have a great relationship. So of course I'm a little bit biased when it comes to evaluating a coworker I'm fond of. And then also, to effectively assess soft skills, you need an assessment solution that will fulfill your objective, whether that be for school accreditation or to develop students or to improve your program or all of the above. So like I said, Peregrine came up with a solution to help schools overcome this challenge. It is a 360-degree evaluation process that directly measures soft skill proficiency. Peregrine has been administering these assessments for over 15 years and realized that this industry solution that we've used in leadership development could work for higher education. The assessment uses the perspective of peers, supervisors, advisors, mentors, and colleagues, and they are prompted to give feedback in such a way that you can collect objective or minimally subjective and accurate measures of relative skill levels as they would be expressed in the workplace. So let's just dig into some of the key features of this assessment solution and the benefits of evaluate skills. The assessment solution allows you to use the expertise of our team to customize your instrument by selecting from a database of more than 200 skills and the corresponding rubrics. I currently am working with a school right now. I just built them a sample instrument report that includes all the possible skills that map directly to their competencies. They review that instrument report because there were some, maybe they have a competency, and I saw that 2 soft skills that we have in our bank could potentially work for that student learning outcome that they have listed out. So therefore they took a look at that and they've provided me with feedback. And so I'm going to bring to them a fully finished instrument report that they can take and use and run with. You can also write your own skills in rubrics and add them to your assessment. You can create as many instruments as you need within the administration site to measure the skills of various groups and cohorts. The rubrics are really important because they allow you to measure items that feel intangible. Each assessment item offers a rubric of statements and sample behaviors to reduce the subjectivity. So just like I said, let's say I want to evaluate my peer, Paul, and I get along with Paul very well, and I consider him a friend as much as a peer. Therefore, I feel more apt to score him high on, let's say, emotional intelligence. The rubrics force the evaluator to consider the statement, behavior, and scaling before assessing to ensure that the feedback is objective. Also, you have the ability to collect written feedback, adding to the richness of the data. The administrative site is very easy to use, and you can create and manage your instruments, assessments, manage student registrations, evaluators, track progress of evaluations, and generate reports. Once the assessment is complete, once it's all done online, and the evaluators, once they've assessed your students, you will be able to pull reports. We have participant reports and group level reports. EvaluSkills provides a participant report for, that you and the students can generate, and they have a variety of graphs and charts to show the results and put them into perspective. Here you'll see an example of a report that shows the participants' total average score across all competencies. Here's another example showing where they score on emotional intelligence. The students do have the opportunity to assess themselves, which is really great because they can see if they have any blind spots. So the student self-score was 4. Their evaluator average, let's say they had 5 evaluators, that average score was 3.8 because this is on a scale of 5, and then the group average was 4.15. So that student can see, oh, I'm rating myself a tad higher than most people rate me, so maybe that's a blind spot there. But once you have this information, once you have this data, once you have this awareness, what's the next step? Each participant report includes an action plan to highlight strengths to sustain, note weaknesses to improve, and provides a timeline and asks for a timeline and a person to hold you accountable. So that way you can really engage in growing and learning and developing your soft skills as a student. So here's just another look at the action plan. Again, these slides will be available in the handout section of the GoToWebinar panel. And then the group reports are really nice because they allow you to look at a group of individuals' overall strengths and weaknesses. Maybe you see in a specific leadership competency that your students are quite low, but that's one of your learning objectives, and so you want to bring that up. So you make changes to your program, right, that focus on leadership communication or something of that, something like that. And then you measure the next year and you see, oh, we made that change and that made an improvement in our students' relative soft skills. Also, you can measure and change growth over time if you do a pre-post test construct. So you have the students be evaluated at the beginning of the program, and then at the end of the program, you can see their growth and change over time, which is really nice. So in conclusion, EvaluSkills provides a flexible, customizable assessment instrument, standardized rubrics for objectivity, a really easy to use administrative site, group reports, participant action plans, and the ability to use a pre-post test construct for longitudinal analysis to directly measure change with participant development. All right, so we are going to do our last poll and we're almost done, I promise. Thank you for sticking with us. I will launch that right now. And in this poll, we want to know how we can help. So Paul talked a little bit about our Assurance of Learning module, which will give you free access to. We also would be happy to schedule a consultation to discuss our various solutions, but also discuss what you need and maybe some questions you have or challenges that you're experiencing. And then we also have white papers on our assessment that we recently published, and they show so much data. We actually, in our business administration assessment white paper, we analyzed over 10 years worth of data, over 500,000 exams, I believe. And what we found was that there was an upward trend in quality for our partner schools that were utilizing our assessment data and closing the loop in their assurance of learning processes, which was really rewarding to us because that is why we're here, is to improve and impact the quality of education all around the world. So we've gotten a lot of you to vote. I'll just give you a second more. Like I said, we have free access to that module just to help you with your continuing, professional development and give you the tools that you need. And also we're here to help you and be your thought partner. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and you've answered. Oh, we have a few more voting. We're going to close this poll and we will reach out to you within the next day or two with information on how to access your module, grab the white paper, and or a meetings link so that you can schedule a meeting with us. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and move on to our next slide. All right. Questions. Do we have any questions here? We have a couple minutes left, so
yeah, we've got a few that came in. I don't think we'll be able to get to all of them. One of the questions that came up, which is a good question for with regarding to measuring students. Someone said, do I need to measure all the students in all my programs? And this often comes up with accreditors but generally, the rule of thumb is to have a good representative sample of your students. Now, the key word there is representative, because that means you don't want to, cherry pick your students, but you want to make sure that you have a good representative sample of students. So some schools will come up with a process by which students are selected to take the exam, or you pick a particular cohort and you measure all of those students. Now, if you have the means, then it is better to measure everybody because you're looking at the entire cohort, but it doesn't need to be, in every single student in every program, and you can move that around. So that's possible in terms of the question that was asked there. Another question, which is good because of course I'm here in Europe, with the assessments, they are available in other languages. So the Global Business Assessment is available in French and English, of course, but it's English sort of British style, so we take away kind of the US centric. But we also have Spanish and German and Portuguese. So there are a number of different languages. If you have programs that are in other languages, you're in other parts of the world, and you want to use program languages other than English, we do offer that. One other question is about setup. This looks complicated to put into place. How much time? And that's a good question, because what happens is on our end, when maybe Desiree and I are working with you, that's where the time comes in, is when working together, trying to figure out which best meets your needs. Okay, do we want these test banks? Do we want to use soft skills? Which type of soft skills? So we kind of dig deep into coming up with questions that we ask. Once we have the information, our side is really very fast. I mean, I've set up institutions in the matter of a week, because what we do is we then take all that information. We have a team of client engagement managers who will then set that up either on your platform, your LMS platform, or on what we call a microsite, and that allows you to test it. So we give you, your faculty, the opportunity to test it, and then you can make it available to your students, and that can be done in less than a week. Now, when we have other options of adding your own test banks or a survey, because we have a survey that you can integrate that, that takes a little bit more time, but not a lot of time. And as Desiree said, there's an automation part of value skills. Once you have the evaluator selected, once you have the timing set up, once you have decided on which one of those competencies you want to, it's automated. So you're getting the reports, you're getting that information, the student knows what's coming in from the different evaluators, and they have to keep track of that, and the person looking at the results. And you are a part of our process is you can generate all the reports that you want. I mean, we give you training on doing that, but it's very user friendly in terms of being able to do that. I do have a couple.
And we've gotten a couple more questions. Yes. So
go ahead.
one of them Yeah, one of them is what kind of documents can be provided for micro-learning credentials. And, I would be interested to learn more about what your specific needs are before I could really answer that question. Peregrine does have a partnership with Accreditation. We just started to provide digital badges. We currently are not providing them to our higher education partners. We're working with our business and industry partners on that. However, that is something that we could be open to. Also, we value skills with the reports that could be used to substantiate micro learning credentials and then the assessment. We do have schools that do use our business administration assessment on the course level. We can do that. It's not as common if you're looking at using smaller number of topics for that micro learning credential. So maybe you only need 2 or 3 topics for the assessment for that credential. We can definitely do that. We're quite flexible.
Yeah, and the other part is that certificate of completion. I know here it's used often as a credential proof. I've gone through this assessment. It's external to my school. It's a secure assessment, so this can qualify with regards to sort of a credential for micro learning. And you're right, you don't have to choose every single one of those test banks. You can do them individually. We're coming down to the wire here. We do have another question. Does a value skills measure the perception of the competition? That is how much I think I have the competition, or evaluates the competition. I'm not sure I fully understand if you mean
I think they mean competency.
Competence. Okay, competence. Okay. Yes, thanks for clarifying that. How much I have? Yeah. Well, what happens with the value skills? It measures. It measures competence. In those particular areas, because you have a. If I understand your question, you have a rubric that allows you to look at the degree to which the student is, is reaching a particular competence that you've set. So is that what the question is? Do you see that differently, Desiree?
Yeah, so I think what I see is, so it's evaluate. So the evaluators, the person evaluating the student, it's measuring, based on very, very specific behavior statements, right? So with scaling, so does Paul do this thing, right? That is what it's asking the evaluator, which helps us remove the subjectivity. But then also Paul can evaluate himself. Now, Paul is more likely.
That's the part that they're looking for, is can I evaluate myself? And you can evaluate yourself.
Yes. So if I did value skills, I would evaluate, if I was a student, I would evaluate myself, which of course I would be more biased and subjective, right? I would read the behavior statement and be like, oh yeah, I do that all the time. But then I would send it out to maybe 5 to 8 of my peers, coworkers, mentors, maybe faculty members, and they would look at the behavior statement and be like, not very often, right? And so then I could see if I had a blind spot. So most likely my assessment of myself is probably going to be subjective, whereas the assessment of others, because they're going to be looking at those behaviors, it's going to be more objective, and then you can compare those results.
Yeah. I have a great question from my friend John. He asked, where do you fit gen ed outcomes into business in a business program? And this comes up again and again, because now we're switching. Don't we want to include them? Which generally they're not. I mean, John's asking a question because they're generally not. But he says things like writing, critical thinking, cultural competence, those kinds of things. This is really on the value skills side. I think the value skills can measure some of those gen ed competencies, because we have over 200 that exist. But that's going to be evaluators that are going to be looking at that. That's not going to be students sitting down taking a comprehensive assessment. These are going to be evaluators that are going to be looking at someone's writing skills, someone's critical thinking skills, someone's cultural competencies. With those 200 plus available, most of what you're asking can be found in that list. But I work with schools that are creating their own competencies and their own that are going to be integrated that. But that's, the gen ed side of it would probably be on the evaluate skills. So I think we're kind of running out of time. If we have
Yes.
some other questions, but we're going to have to cut this off and we'll respond to that. I think we have a couple more slides with some contact information.
Yes, I can show those. Are you still seeing my screen?
Yes, I have a screen I'm looking at. There you go.
Okay, all right. So there's our contact information. We'll leave that up for just a moment, but of course you will hear from us in the next, 24 to 48 hours, and you can respond to our emails there as well. It was lovely being with you today, and we enjoyed sharing this information with you.
Yeah, and as I said, if you would like to set up time to work through any of these, or that we any of these things that we've talked about or others, just drop us an email or reach us through our website. We'd be happy to chat with you and get to know the audience a little bit better. So thanks again for joining us. And maybe, I think we have another slide, maybe someday we'll be able to do these really like live and see you at one of the accreditation conferences and shake your hand and have a cup of coffee and, do what we were born to do as humans, interact face to face. So I read with great passion today in the Le Monde, which is the French newspaper, that eventually we're going to take permission to have our masks off. And tomorrow they're finally opening outdoor dining, and we'll be able to go to a museum, with 20 people in it. But so yeah, we're getting there. So that's good news.
Yes, it is. Well, have a great evening or morning, everyone. We'll see.
Thank you
We'll
so
see you
much.
later. Bye.
Bye.